The news spread quickly, faster than anyone could have expected. The galaxy had long been a place where civilizations rose and fell, where treaties were signed, and peace was often an illusion. But now, something had changed. Something that no one had prepared for. Humanity had revealed a power that shook the stars themselves. It wasn't the first time humans had been noticed, of course. The galaxy had watched Earth for centuries. Their history was filled with wars, revolutions, and moments of brilliance. But never had anyone imagined that these small, unpredictable creatures could become a threat on the scale they were now witnessing. The Zarniks, the first to make contact with humans, had been the first to report something unusual. They'd come with peaceful intentions, eager to establish friendly relations, but after meeting Captain Nathan Ellis, they realized just how unprepared they were. Captain Ellis, standing alone in a field, had triggered something. They couldn't explain it, but something in the air had shifted. A cosmic storm appeared from nowhere, its energy fluctuating like a massive wave. The Zarniks, knowing their advanced technology, had assumed that it was some sort of natural disaster. But the way Ellis had stood there, unfazed, staring into the storm with those cold eyes, it made them uncomfortable. He didn't run. He didn't seek shelter. Instead, he did something they couldn't explain. With a single word, he calmed the storm. It wasn't magic. It wasn't technology. It was something else, something beyond anything the Zarniks had seen in their entire existence. And the question Ellis had whispered, "Is the human having a bad day?" lingered in their minds. The Zarniks feared it wasn't just a question, it was a challenge. As the word spread across the galaxy, other species began to take notice. They had heard rumors of Earth, of humans, but they hadn't realized just how much they had underestimated them. The Voru Confederacy, one of the galaxy's most powerful and ancient empires, sent fleets to Earth to observe and investigate. They were the first to make direct contact with humanity's leaders, demanding answers. The Voru were known for their advanced technology and their ability to manipulate gravity. They had been the dominant force in their part of the galaxy for centuries. But now they were concerned. Humanity's sudden rise was something they couldn't ignore. In the quiet corridors of the Voru flagship, a meeting took place between their top officials and representatives from Earth. The humans, led by President Clara Montgomery, were calm, almost unnervingly so. She wasn't afraid, despite the towering alien forms in front of her. She stood tall and composed, answering their questions without hesitation. But when the Voru asked about the strange events that had been happening around Earth, when they inquired about Captain Ellis and his mysterious abilities, President Montgomery didn't give a clear answer. Instead, she turned to the Voru and asked, "Is the human having a bad day?" At first, the Voru didn't understand. They were puzzled by the question. It seemed nonsensical. But as the silence stretched, it began to dawn on them. This was the heart of humanity's power. They had faced countless threats in the galaxy, and every time, they adapted. But no one had seen a species with the raw, unpredictable nature of humans. No one had realized how terrifying it could be to have a species that could turn the tide of any battle simply by asking if they were having a bad day. The Voru, who had once dominated the stars with their fleet and technology, began to feel the weight of fear. They weren't the only ones. The Zarniks, having witnessed the strange energy around Captain Ellis, sent a report to the Galactic Council, urging them to take humanity seriously. The message was clear. Humanity wasn't just a threat. They were a force of nature. If they were pushed too far, they would wipe out entire fleets without a second thought. The report also mentioned something even more chilling. The humans had survived. They had survived wars, environmental disasters, even their own mistakes. If anyone could survive what the galaxy was about to throw at them, it would be humanity. The Galactic Council, made up of representatives from dozens of species, convened to discuss the implications of this new revelation. The council was supposed to be a place of unity, a place to resolve disputes peacefully. But now, with humanity on the rise, things were different. Everyone in the room knew that the galaxy's old balance of power had been shattered. Tensions ran high during the meeting. The council members argued fiercely, some insisting that humanity posed no real threat, that their recent successes were mere luck. But others, those who had studied Earth in greater detail, knew better. They knew that humanity's rise wasn't just a series of coincidences. It was a pattern. Every time humanity faced destruction, they not only survived, they thrived. They grew stronger. They adapted. And worst of all, they did it all while asking, is the human having a bad day? In the midst of the chaos, a representative from the Threxian Empire, a species known for their intelligence and diplomacy, stood up and raised a hand. "We cannot ignore what we have seen," she said, her voice steady. "The humans are not like any species we've encountered. If we underestimate them now, it could be the last mistake we ever make." Her words resonated with the council. They knew it was true. There had been other races in the galaxy that had risen to power, only to fall to their own pride and arrogance. But none had faced a species like humanity. They had no magic. They had no superior technology. What they had, instead, was a stubborn, relentless will to survive. And that made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The council knew that if humanity were to be dealt with, they had to act quickly. But no one knew how to contain them. Humanity wasn't easily intimidated. In fact, they were starting to make demands of their own. Earth's representatives sent a message to the galaxy's most powerful species. "We are not asking for peace. We are demanding respect. And if you wish to continue existing in this galaxy, you will respect us." This was the breaking point. For the first time in history, an unknown species was openly challenging the power of the established galactic empires. The question had been asked, and it had sent ripples of fear through the hearts of the galaxy's most powerful races. Is the human having a bad day? The question wasn't just a joke. It wasn't just a rhetorical question. It was a warning. As the galaxy watched, humans began to make their move. Ships designed for peaceful exploration suddenly turned into formidable warships. The technologies that humanity had been hiding for centuries began to surface, and with them, the unpredictability that had made them so terrifying. Every encounter with humans now carried a risk. If they were pushed too far, they might unleash a fury that no one could stop. Across the galaxy, leaders and officials gathered in secret, trying to figure out how to handle this new threat. Some proposed immediate military action, hoping to crush humanity before they could grow stronger. Others called for diplomacy, trying to understand the root of humanity's power before it became uncontrollable. But all of them, no matter how they approached the situation, couldn't stop asking the same question. Is the human having a bad day? And in the darkest corners of the galaxy, where the most powerful and ancient species lived, there was a growing sense of dread. They knew that the answer to that question could change everything. And if they weren't careful, it might just be the end of them all. Humanity, once a footnote in the history of the stars, was no longer just a species to be observed. They were now the wild card, the force that could tear the galaxy apart. And the galaxy's response to them would determine whether it would remain whole or fall into chaos. The first response from the galaxy came from the Voru Confederacy. They were the oldest and most advanced empire in the known universe, their fleets controlling vast portions of space. They had no intention of letting a species as unpredictable as humanity rise unchecked. They sent their forces to Earth, demanding that the humans either submit to the Galactic Council or face annihilation. They underestimated the humans once again. The Voru believed their immense firepower would be enough to crush the Earthlings. But when their fleet arrived in Earth's orbit, they were greeted by nothing more than silence. The humans, led by President Clara Montgomery, didn't send their armies to fight. Instead, they sent a single message, broadcasted across the galaxy, from their capital, Washington, D.C. "We don't want war," the message began. "But if it's war you want, then we'll show you exactly what it means to challenge us." The message was simple, but it held a weight far greater than anything the Voru had expected. In response, the Voru launched a military offensive against Earth, their fleets descending from the stars, expecting to obliterate humanity. What followed was beyond even their wildest imaginations. Captain Ellis, along with a few hundred of Earth's finest soldiers, activated what seemed like an unassuming device. The sky above Earth shimmered, and then, with an explosion of light, the Voru fleet was struck with a devastating EMP pulse. Their ships, once so powerful, were rendered useless in an instant. Their weapons malfunctioned, their shields fell, and their fleets scattered into chaos. No one could understand how it had happened, except for the humans. The Voru fleet was disabled without a single shot fired by the humans, and Earth's skies were quiet again. The message had been sent loud and clear. Humanity was not to be underestimated. In the aftermath, the Galactic Council was left in disarray. They had thought that humanity was a fragile species, one that could be easily manipulated. They had never expected them to be so dangerous. With the Voru fleet defeated, humanity's influence continued to grow, not just across the galaxy, but in the hearts of every other species that had been watching from the sidelines. It wasn't just Earth that had shown its power. It was the humans themselves, their unity, their willingness to adapt, and their sheer force of will. Humans were no longer just a species of survivors. They were conquerors in their own right. And with each new encounter, they absorbed more knowledge, more technology, and more power. It was as if they were a catalyst. No matter what they touched, it seemed to either fall apart or grow stronger. There was no middle ground. The news spread like wildfire. The Galthran Dominion, an aggressive, warlike species, sent a delegation to Earth. They demanded to know how humanity had done the impossible. The humans were cryptic in their response. "You wouldn't understand," President Montgomery said. "But I'll ask you one thing. Is the human having a bad day?" The Galthrans hesitated. It was the same question, the same haunting tone that had followed humanity since their rise. But this time, the Galthrans didn't laugh or dismiss it. They looked at one another, uncertain, before retreating to their ships. At that moment, the galaxy began to shift. The most powerful species now understood that humanity's strength didn't lie in their technology, or their numbers, or even their strategy. It lay in their unpredictability. And that, more than anything else, made them a force to be reckoned with. The Galactic Council's response. A year after the Voru defeat, the Galactic Council convened again. The decision was clear. They needed to act before humanity became too powerful. The Council was divided into factions, some advocating for immediate military action, while others suggested a diplomatic approach. The counselors who had seen humanity's might firsthand, however, knew that war with the humans would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever experienced. The Threxian Empire, known for their intelligence and understanding of the nature of the galaxy, sent a representative to Earth, offering a new proposal. They suggested a grand alliance, an accord where humanity would be accepted into the fold of galactic powers, not as an equal, but as a force of balance. They recognized that humanity's volatile nature could either save or destroy the galaxy. They had seen what happened when humanity was pushed too far, and they realized that a peaceful coexistence was no longer an option. But Earth's response was still the same. They weren't interested in alliances or treaties. What humanity wanted was respect. And if the galaxy couldn't offer that, they would continue to grow stronger. And they would do so on their own terms. "I'll ask you again," President Montgomery said during a tense meeting with the galactic leaders, her eyes locking with each of them. "Is the human having a bad day?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. The Council had no answer. They couldn't answer. And that, more than anything, confirmed what everyone had begun to fear. Humanity's hidden strength. Behind the scenes, humanity was preparing for something much greater. While the galaxy's most powerful species debated their next steps, the humans had quietly unlocked a secret that even they hadn't fully understood. Captain Ellis, once just a soldier, had come to realize something remarkable. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their ability to fight or conquer, it was in their will to never give up. This was something the galaxy's civilizations hadn't realized. Humanity didn't win because they had superior technology. They didn't win because they were the most organized or the most powerful. They won because they were unpredictable. They were chaotic. They were reckless, and yet that chaos had a strange order of its own. With this newfound understanding, Captain Ellis began to take his mission to the next level. He wasn't just leading humanity into battle. He was shaping the future of the entire galaxy, a future where humans would play by their own rules, not anyone else's. The question remained, is the human having a bad day? And the galaxy knew one thing for certain. If they answered that question wrong, it would be the last thing they ever asked. The galaxy was no longer the same. What had once been a realm of calculated power and careful diplomacy was now filled with unease, as the humans' presence became undeniable. Their resilience had stunned the most advanced species. Their sudden rise was like a storm that couldn't be predicted, a force of nature that the galaxy's empires couldn't control. And as more time passed, it became clear. Humanity wasn't just surviving. They were thriving, growing stronger with every challenge thrown at them. In the quiet corridors of the Galactic Council, a palpable tension hung in the air. The leaders, once secure in their reins, were no longer certain of their positions. They had underestimated humanity, and now the question echoed through their minds every day. Is the human having a bad day? It was more than just a phrase. It was a reminder that humanity could snap, react unpredictably, and unleash chaos at any moment. The galaxy had seen the first glimpse of what happened when they tested humanity's resolve. And now, no one wanted to find out what would happen if they pushed too far. In a hidden base on Earth, Captain Nathan Ellis and President Clara Montgomery convened with their top military minds. They had been expecting an escalation. The Voru, reeling from their failed offensive, had retreated, but they weren't done yet. The Galthrans, with their endless thirst for conquest, had begun to gather forces at the edge of human space. The Threxian Empire, despite their initial diplomatic proposals, had shown their true colors. They were prepared to make a move, believing humanity's influence could be curbed with the right amount of force. But Captain Ellis wasn't worried. His recent encounter with the Zarniks had shown him the growing understanding of humanity's power across the galaxy. The humans were no longer just surviving. They were learning, adapting, and pulling together in ways the galaxy's most advanced species couldn't even begin to comprehend. The humans' greatest strength, Captain Ellis believed, wasn't their weapons or technology. It was their unity. The way they had come together as a species, when everything seemed lost, was something no other race in the galaxy had ever experienced. They didn't rely on technology alone, or on sheer numbers, or on complex political alliances. Humanity relied on each other, on their willingness to fight for their home, for their family, for their future. And it was that spirit, more than anything else, that made them so dangerous. President Montgomery, ever the strategic mind, understood that their success so far had been more than just luck. They hadn't won battles through sheer force. They had won through sheer will. The galaxy couldn't understand that kind of thinking, and that was what would keep humanity one step ahead. But there was another factor at play, something far more dangerous. Humanity's own discovery of their potential had started to unfold in unexpected ways. Captain Ellis, through his experiences and his understanding of the strange energy that seemed to surround him, had begun to tap into something more than just instinct. It was as though the energy that had been released during his battle with the Voru fleet had awakened a dormant power within him. It wasn't just about brute force anymore. It was about awareness. As Ellis learned to harness this new energy, the rest of humanity began to follow suit. Not all at once, but in waves. In every corner of Earth, scientists, engineers, and ordinary civilians began to notice small changes in their own lives. Strange, seemingly impossible things were happening. Electronics malfunctioned in strange ways. Small natural phenomena occurred without explanation. People, once ordinary, found themselves capable of extraordinary feats. There was a sudden surge in human potential, a collective awakening that was as unsettling as it was exciting. The rest of the galaxy watched this with increasing concern. They had thought humanity was just another primitive species, destined to be crushed beneath the weight of galactic politics. They had seen this pattern before, new species rising, struggling for dominance, only to burn out and fade into the void. But humanity wasn't fading. They were ascending. The first move. It didn't take long for the first spark of conflict to ignite once again. The Galthrans, a fierce, war-hungry species, had been the first to test humanity's strength after their defeat by the Voru. They believed that if they crushed humanity now, they could regain control of the galaxy. They launched a series of raids against human colonies on the fringes of Earth's territory, confident that the humans were still too weak to defend themselves properly. They were wrong. The human response was swift and brutal. Captain Ellis, now a symbol of humanity's potential, led the charge. Using a combination of their newfound energy and their superior adaptability, the humans quickly adapted the very technology they had once relied on for peace and turned it into something terrifying. Ships that had once been used for exploration became warships, each one a manifestation of humanity's evolving will to survive and thrive. Their weapons were unlike anything the Galthrans had encountered, a mix of human ingenuity and the mysterious energy that humanity was beginning to understand. The Galthrans, who prided themselves on their superior weaponry, were overwhelmed. Their fleets were shattered, their armies scattered. Humanity's quick, decisive action had sent a shockwave through the galaxy. This was no longer about a species fighting for survival. Humanity was making a statement. They weren't just here to exist. They were here to dominate. As the battle raged, the rest of the galaxy watched, paralyzed. The Zarniks, the Voru, even the Threxians, each one knew what this meant. They had been watching the humans for far too long, and now it was clear. Humanity had crossed a line. They were no longer just a threat. They were a new power, a force of nature capable of reshaping the galaxy itself. In a desperate attempt to rein in humanity, the Galactic Council called for an emergency meeting. They had been forced into action, knowing they had to contain humanity before they became an unstoppable force. But even as they gathered, a chilling realization swept over the council. They were too late. The question that had haunted the galaxy for so long, "Is the human having a bad day?" had taken on a new meaning. The humans weren't just unpredictable. They weren't just powerful. They were unstoppable. And now, the galaxy had to face the consequences of underestimating them. Humanity wasn't just a force to be feared. It was a new empire rising in the stars. And as the Galthran fleets burned in the sky, one question remained at the forefront of everyone's mind. How long until the humans came for us next? The universe had never seen anything like this. The galaxy, once a vast and intricate web of power and diplomacy, was now gripped by a single question. How far would humanity go? Every species across the stars was forced to reconsider everything they had thought they knew about the human race. The once small and fragile planet called Earth had now proven to be the cradle of an unstoppable force, and the galaxy, trembling at humanity's newfound power, could only wait in fear for the next move. In the wake of humanity's victory over the Galthrans, a strange silence had settled over the galaxy. The Galactic Council was in disarray, scrambling to maintain some semblance of control. The Threxian Empire, once proud and unchallenged in their authority, now found themselves at the mercy of a species they had dismissed as insignificant. The Voru, though powerful and technologically advanced, had been humbled by the sheer unpredictability of humanity's response. Even the Zarniks, a peaceful and wise race who had watched Earth's rise with fascination, now feared the day when humanity might turn their sights on them. But there was something even more unnerving than humanity's power. It was their refusal to be controlled. The humans had shown that they could not be manipulated, that their will to survive, to grow, and to adapt surpassed the limits that even the most ancient species had set for themselves. The question, "Is the human having a bad day?" had become more than just a warning. It was now a symbol of the galaxy's collective fear, and it echoed across the stars with a chilling resonance. Back on Earth, President Clara Montgomery and Captain Nathan Ellis stood in the heart of the capital, watching as humanity prepared for its next phase. The defeat of the Galthrans had been swift, but they both knew that this was only the beginning. The galaxy would not simply bow to Earth's rising influence. They would come for humanity, each empire with their own plan to either destroy or control them. But the humans weren't afraid. They had made it this far through sheer determination, and now their purpose was clear: to carve a place for themselves in the galaxy, on their own terms. The human military, now strengthened by the mysterious energy that had begun to awaken within them, was more than ready for the challenges ahead. The strange power they had tapped into was growing stronger with every day, and Captain Ellis knew that it could not be contained forever. It was not just a weapon, it was a part of humanity itself. The more they embraced it, the stronger they became. And Ellis, who had first discovered it during the Voru assault, had become its most powerful wielder. With every battle, every conflict, he felt the energy coursing through him, guiding him, shaping him into something more than a soldier. He had become the embodiment of humanity's will. In a secret meeting room deep within the Human Military Command Center, Ellis and Montgomery discussed the future. Earth had already sent a clear message to the galaxy. Humanity was not to be underestimated. But the real question was what came next. The Galthrans had been defeated, but other empires would not be so easily cowed. The Voru, though shaken, would surely attempt another attack. The Threxians had begun to mobilize their forces, preparing for a possible war. The galaxy was about to be thrown into a new kind of chaos, one where humanity was at the center. "We've shown them we won't back down," Montgomery said, her voice steady but laced with an edge of concern. "But we're not just defending ourselves anymore. They'll come after us, Ellis. All of them." Ellis nodded, his expression grim. "They'll try. But we got something they don't have. We have unity. The galaxy doesn't understand that. They don't understand what happens when we all come together." Montgomery's gaze hardened as she looked out the window at the sprawling city below. Humanity had risen from the ashes of destruction to become a force of unimaginable power. But the price of that rise was the certainty that they would never be left in peace. The galaxy had watched as Earth was forced into conflict, and now the galaxy would watch as humanity chose to fight for its place among the stars. Whether the galaxy was ready or not, humanity's storm was coming, and no one would be able to stop it. Captain Ellis was already preparing for the inevitable. He knew that Earth's greatest weapon was not its fleets, not its technology, and not its new abilities. It was the sheer will of its people. Humans had faced impossible odds and survived, again and again. They had learned, adapted, and grown. The galaxy's greatest empires were beginning to understand something that humans already knew. When pushed to the edge, humanity didn't just fight. They thrived. Ellis stood up from his chair, his eyes burning with a resolve that matched the storm raging inside him. "We're ready for whatever comes next, but we can't afford to be alone in this fight. It's time to take our place, to build our alliances, to shape the future of this galaxy." Montgomery nodded in agreement. "Then we will. We'll make them understand. Earth is not just a world of survivors anymore. It's the heart of a new empire." The call for unity. The next steps were clear. Humanity would forge alliances, but only on its own terms. Earth would not bow to anyone. They would not be a subordinate power in the galaxy, nor would they be a passive player. The humans would carve their own path, and if anyone stood in their way, they would show the galaxy just how terrifying they could truly be. But as Earth began to mobilize for the future, a new challenge arose. Whispers of a dark power from beyond the galaxy. The mystery of the strange energy that humanity had discovered wasn't just about raw strength. It was something older, something far more dangerous than they had imagined. And while humanity had embraced it, there were others, darker forces, that sought to control it, to twist it to their own ends. Captain Ellis and President Montgomery had no idea how deep the roots of this new threat went. They only knew one thing: the storm had only just begun. The humans were no longer simply reacting to the threats of the galaxy. They were making their own rules, and in doing so, they had unleashed something far more profound than anyone could have predicted. The galaxy was no longer a place of peace. It was a battlefield, where humanity would either rise as the dominant force or face the consequences of their own power. And as the fleets of the galaxy prepared for the inevitable conflict, the question that had started it all lingered in the air, unanswered. Is the human having a bad day? The galaxy would soon find out. The galaxy was in turmoil. For centuries, the empires of the stars had maintained a delicate balance, a web of power built on diplomacy, military might, and mutual fear. But now, the very fabric of that balance was being torn apart by a question. A single, seemingly innocuous phrase. Is the human having a bad day? The galaxy had never faced anything like humanity. It was as if a sudden storm had swept through, scattering the old order and leaving uncertainty in its wake. For the first time, all eyes were on Earth. The Galthrans, the Voru, the Threxians, all of them had been forced to reconsider everything they had once believed about the human species, and now they were preparing for a war that would determine the future of the galaxy itself. The question was no longer if humanity would rise to power. It was how far humanity would push. The Galactic Council, once a powerful force in the universe, had been left fractured and uncertain. The once untouchable factions that had ruled the stars were now scrambling to find their footing. The Galthrans, humiliated by their defeat, were rebuilding their fleet, but they knew that a direct assault on Earth would lead to their destruction. The Voru, ever cautious, began to retreat, wary of stirring the same storm that had shattered the Galthrans. And the Threxians, who had long seen themselves as the galaxy's rulers, found themselves scrambling to adapt to a new order where humans were the unknown variable, unpredictable and dangerous. But there was another force at play, something far darker than anything the galaxy had yet encountered. Captain Nathan Ellis, the face of humanity's rise, had long felt the strange energy within him, a force he had only begun to understand. It wasn't just power. It was a connection to something ancient, something beyond the galaxies themselves. And now, as the universe braced itself for war, that power was growing. Back on Earth, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. President Clara Montgomery knew that the fate of their species rested on a knife's edge. The battles fought so far were only the beginning. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they would not be pushed around, that they would not bow to anyone. But she also knew that the future of Earth depended on something more than just strength. It depended on unity, on the people of Earth coming together to create something greater than themselves. But as Ellis delved deeper into the mysteries of the energy flowing within him, he began to uncover a terrifying truth. This power, which had given humanity such an edge, was not just a weapon. It was a force of creation and destruction. And somewhere, out in the vastness of space, a darker, older force had been watching, waiting for the moment when humanity's power would fully awaken. The unseen enemy. It was a quiet day when the first message arrived. No one had expected it, least of all President Montgomery and Captain Ellis. The message came not from a neighboring empire, not from the Threxians or the Galthrans, but from an ancient race long forgotten by the galaxy. They called themselves the Elderkin, a race of beings older than the stars themselves, their power so great that the galaxy had collectively wiped their existence from history. The message was short, cryptic, and chilling. Humanity has awoken the ancient forces. You have crossed the threshold. Now the reckoning begins. The words sent ripples of fear through the command centers of Earth. Ellis, having felt the strange energy within him grow stronger with each passing day, began to understand what the message meant. The force he had been tapping into, the power that had allowed humanity to achieve what no one thought possible, was not just a gift, it was a signal that had awakened the Elderkin, an ancient force of unimaginable power. Humanity's rise had been swift, but now, it seemed they had drawn the attention of a force far older and more dangerous than anything they had ever encountered. The Elderkin, it seemed, were not just observers. They were the gatekeepers of the universe's most destructive energies. And now that humanity had awakened those forces, the Elderkin were coming to reclaim what they believed to be theirs. The stakes had never been higher. It was no longer just about dominating the galaxy. It was about surviving the wrath of an ancient, almost godlike species that had been watching humanity's rise from the shadows. And the worst part, humanity had no idea how to stop them. A new war begins. The Galactic Council, still reeling from humanity's rise, quickly realized that the Elderkin were a threat to all life in the galaxy, not just to humanity. Desperate to avoid a full-scale war, they sent emissaries to Earth, begging for peace, offering alliances. But President Montgomery, now resolute in her belief that humanity had earned its place among the stars, refused to yield. She knew that the galaxy would never accept humanity as an equal. It would always see them as an unpredictable force to be controlled. If humanity was to survive, they would have to fight not only for their future, but for the very right to exist. Ellis, meanwhile, was growing more attuned to the strange energy within him. He could feel it calling to him, urging him to unlock its full potential. But every time he did, the force seemed to grow darker, more intense. He could feel its pull toward destruction, and though part of him feared it, part of him welcomed it. He knew that if humanity was to survive the coming storm, they would need every ounce of strength they could muster. And so, with the Elderkin drawing closer, Earth prepared for the most difficult battle it had ever faced. The human military, empowered by the strange energy they had discovered, began to develop new technologies, new weapons, and new strategies that were unlike anything the galaxy had seen. But the Elderkin were not ordinary enemies. They were an ancient race with powers beyond human comprehension. Their ships were massive, their weapons capable of tearing planets apart, and their very presence felt like a weight pressing down on the galaxy itself. Humanity was facing not just an external threat, but a reckoning of its own creation. The energy they had harnessed was both a blessing and a curse. It had brought them power and unimaginable potential, but it had also drawn the attention of the very forces that had once ruled the universe. The final battle. As the Elderkin descended upon Earth, their ships blotting out the stars, Captain Ellis knew that the time for questions was over. The time for preparation had passed. The galaxy was on the brink of chaos, and the humans, for better or worse, were at the center of it all. Humanity had become the galaxy's most unpredictable force, a force that could either save the universe or tear it apart. Is the human having a bad day? The phrase had taken on new meaning now. The answer was simple. No, humanity wasn't having a bad day. Humanity was having its finest hour. The war to end all wars was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same.